Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Oh, it's a rainy.
It's been raining all week.
I know. It's going to be nice to just curl up with a book and some coffee.
Yes.
This week, we're talking about, last week we talked about divorce. And so this week we want to talk about estate planning and marriage.
Yeah.
Kind of all the things to think about, either if you have a plan and are getting married, second marriages, prenups, postnups, all of that.
Silver marriages, the older marriages.
So where should we start?
I don't even know. I think the best place to start, or a place to start, is when we're talking about property. There's a difference between property for estate planning purposes, as far as like separate versus joint, and divorce purposes. So we do not do family law. We do not do divorces, but I know there's a lot of consideration with if someone gets divorced. Okay, what is considered marital property? What's considered separate property? How does that play? And if you have a pre or postnuptial agreement, that can spell that all out. If you don't, then there's other things to consider. And that's where the family law attorneys come in. But when it comes to death, the law kind of assumes that you guys were happily married. And so whatever a spouse owns, the surviving spouse gets a portion of that. And it doesn't necessarily matter that it was separate property unless there's a pre or postnuptial agreement. So I think that with that frame of reference, the rules are different upon death and divorce. But we wanted to talk about what is a postnup, what is a prenup, and why does it matter for estate planning?
Yeah, I think one of the things we say often, right, are prenups and postnups are romantic. It's a good way to sit down and talk about those details while you're friends, right? Figure out what, especially if you are bringing, if it's a second marriage, or if you are bringing an in proportionate assets into a marriage, being able to say, okay, here are the terms and here's what we're bringing in and here's how, if we get divorced, it will be divided up. Or upon our passing, right, pre and post nups can talk about how things are divided within an estate plan. And then they typically say that it is being created at the same time as this, within a certain amount of time of the agreement.
Right.
So those can lay out things like waiving the elective share. So in Maryland, spouses are entitled to 33%. It's known as the elective share. It prevents you from disinheriting a spouse. It's really a protection for, stay-at-home moms and those who are not working. So they don't get left with nothing. But you have the ability to waive it. And so I often see that in pre and post nups of, we're going to divide things up differently, separately. And we waive that elective share, or right to take anything under an elective share, or any other statutory right to a share. So what else in pre and post nups?
Like Megan mentioned too, if you have a blended family, a lot of the reasoning for, if you didn't do a prenup, it's not a big deal. When we talk about postnups, it can address divorce, but if we're helping with it, it's just going to be upon death what happens. And a lot of what we see is for that reason, where you have children from a prior relationship, and maybe the surviving spouse wants to provide for the life of, the spouse who passes first wants to provide for the surviving spouse for their lifetime. But they don't want the surviving spouse to be able to leave that money to anybody other than the kids that were left by the decedent. So if you have that agreement, again, we would want it to waive the elective share so that there's no issue with the surviving spouse and things like that. So you can use it for blended families to make sure that kids from both relationships, or from one relationship, or joint children get exactly what you think is fair. And like Megan said, doing that while the parents like each other is better than trying to figure that out down the road. And what that will do is also help reduce conflict among the kids or among the step parent who survives and the kids, which we do see that often as well.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing when you're thinking about marriage, second marriages, right? I was speaking with someone yesterday who had just gone through a divorce and updating his plan, which we know how important that is. But talking about like if he were to get married again, you know, maybe thinking of a prenup or postnup, but then needing to update his plan again. Or, you know, folks that have been married and then broken up
and then gotten back together.
Yes.
Because we do see that a lot as well. And, you know, for whatever reason, they want to, it's good to just really spell out the terms of what that looks like upon the death of one spouse. Significant age gaps too is another place that might make sense to spell those things out, because it might look much different if, you know, you have a spouse that's significantly older. If that spouse passes first, they probably want to help care for the lifetime, you know, of the surviving spouse. And that spouse might be able to still, again, get remarried. And so you want to think about those things when you're planning and really work through all the what if scenarios. But alternately, what happens if the younger spouse passes first? I think everyone assumes that the older spouse is going to pass first, but we just never know. So taking the time to play out all the different scenarios and then seeing if you actually need to do a postnup makes a lot of sense.
So, and I think in that situation, if you're going in, don't be surprised if the attorney says, okay, great, but I can't help you both.
Right.
Sometimes, right, attorneys can help spouses and work together majority of the times. But there are times where it's advisable for both people to have separate attorneys and do separate planning. And I think often in those situations when you have one attorney, you're still doing separate trusts and that type of situation, just to make sure that things are done the way it's easier to follow your plan and get your goals documented correctly.
Right. And then along with all of that, double check your beneficiary designations. If you've recently been married or recently been divorced, double check your beneficiary designations on life insurance policies, retirement accounts, anything else with a beneficiary, just to make sure that you've named the person you want. And it may or may not be your spouse. You probably don't want it to be your ex-spouse. So whenever we're talking about divorce and marriage, there's a lot of things you want to think about when it comes to the estate planning side, just to make sure that it meshes with the way that you want it to be. So yeah.
I think that's it for this week. Yeah. We have an event coming up in just 4 weeks away, October 23rd. Yeah. We're having tailgates and trusts at Lono Brewery down the street from us. So the registration is now open. I will drop a link in the chat if you are interested in coming and hanging out with us, having a tailgate and learning more about estate planning and ways to help your family.
Yeah, we hope to see you.
Have a great week.
Bye.